Hello, digital nomads. It's a great pleasure to be here among you. There's nothing digital about me. I'm just a nomad. So I hope that half of the equation is enough. But I'm not going to talk about myself. I'm not going to talk about my travels. And I'm not even going to talk about the platform that I'm the founder of, Nomad Mania. One of the things we do on Nomad Mania, and we do a lot of things, we are an expert on the people who have visited every country. I think we are the global expert on that. We've spent a lot of time researching the subject. So I thought it would be quite interesting to all of you as digital nomads who travel from place to place to hear a bit about these people, who they are, a bit of demographic data and statistics. Now, when we talk about traveling to every country, we already have two problems. The first problem is, what is every country? And the second problem is, what is traveling? So let me start by giving you a bit of definition here. What is every country? How do we count? Well, there are a lot of different ways. No one can agree. The starting point, perhaps the easiest way to define it, is to look at the United Nations. And in the United Nations, there are 193 members. And I think this is the cleanest number, it's the most specific number, and this is the one we like to use in Nomad Mania in order to define someone as having done every country. Now, this number is not without a lot of complications. Until about 20 odd years ago, this number would not be correct because our great friend Switzerland, being neutral as they always are, didn't actually join the United Nations until 2002 as the 190th member. In the last 22 years, there's only been 3 new members in the UN. But this is only one of the numbers that we find, because even in the UN, there's another 2 countries which have non-member observer status, and they are the Vatican and Palestine. So some people prefer to go with 195. But then we have further problems, and I don't want this to become political in any way, so I'm just sticking to the facts. There are places like Taiwan. Now, is Taiwan in the United Nations? It isn't. Is it a country? Well, some people say yes, and I'm sure the Taiwanese will say so. So we have other problems. Kosovo, which is not so far from here. Is it a country? Well, it depends who you ask. So some people like to add Taiwan and Kosovo for 197, and some others also add Western Sahara, which is actually mainly part of Morocco, but technically is recognized by some other countries as independent. And then other people are going to say, wait a minute, what about Hong Kong? What about Gibraltar? What about Aruba? Aren't these countries? And then you can end up with a number which is at about 250 even. So there is a lot of trouble in defining what every country is, but there's even more trouble defining what does a visit mean. And why is that? Now imagine that this here is the border of North Korea. Some people will say, oh, I've been to North Korea, yay! And some others will say, no, you haven't, you just crossed a line. So in Nomad Mania, we differentiate between a good visit, and so I would say that all of you can definitely claim you have visited Bansko. Yeah, good visit, you've been here for a few days. Then we've got what we call a minimal visit. And again, there is a lot of definition about what a minimal visit could be. We do, for example, accept visits of a few hours in a place as long as you've seen something of importance. But we will not accept a transit. And in the travel community, unfortunately, some people do accept transits and they claim they've been to places. That is a very loose definition of being a traveler. Now, we have some technically problem cases, which I should bring up. DMZ between South and North Korea is the classic one because American citizens haven't been allowed to go to North Korea by the United States government for the last few years. And so people who are chasing every country have no other choice but to go into a hut which is shared on the border between South and North Korea at the DMZ. And some of them say, okay, now I can claim I have been to North Korea. But in Nomad Mania, we had a poll and we had about 1,300 of our members respond, and more than 80% said, no, you have not been to North Korea because you never even got a visa, let alone be able to tell us stories about what North Korea is about. Similarly, with the Golan Heights, they are a disputed area. They are, according to the UN, part of Syria, but they have been under Israeli administration for more than 50 years. Many people who couldn't get to Syria because of the civil war decided that going to the Golan Heights from the Israeli side means they've been to Syria. Again, we will not accept this. So this is a bit of the kind of technical aspects of travel and how many countries there are. Now, what is a good thing about going to every country? Often people who do it get a lot of criticism. You're obsessed, you're crazy, you're chasing lists, you know, this isn't worthwhile. But there is a lot of good. And I would say the first one is you actually really understand every country. Now, if I tell you Western Africa and you haven't been there, you might, and this is very logical, think that most of the countries are similar. But someone who's actually been to every country of Western Africa knows that they are incredibly different. Similarly, I think many people who are from far away, say from Asia or Latin America, they may not understand the differences between Austria, Italy, Slovenia. They're like, oh, they're near, they must be exactly the same. And we probably know that Italy and Austria are extremely different. So understanding the world also means you become much more tolerant. You have a mental image of every country. This allows you comparisons. And while I don't believe we should actually compare countries, it is kind of fun to be able to say, okay, this place had good food, this place didn't have good food, or the people were friendly there, but they weren't somewhere else. And it's surprising how in neighboring countries, you often find rampantly different approaches. Finally, I believe we all should be political beings. We shouldn't get our news from the outside, at least not always. We should form our own opinions by being in a place. So when you visit a country, that's when you actually get to talk to the locals. That's when you actually get to experience a place firsthand. So that is when you can have your own opinion about how people are there and what the political situation is. Nevertheless, on the other side, the bad about 193. Well, unfortunately, many of the people who are trying to do 193 are only doing so because they want to become social media stars. And in fact, if you Google people who've been to every country, you are going to find some names of people who Nomad Mania doesn't accept as having done them. Because in some occasions, they fly in and fly out on the same plane. And they say, okay, I did that, you know, and then they become stars as the youngest, the first, this and that. And I think when you travel, it should always be driven by curiosity and the desire to learn about the world and never about becoming a quote-unquote star. Then some of the people, just like in the world itself, tend to become arrogant. Look at me, I'm the biggest traveler. Great, how wonderful I am. This is never good. I think if you really want to call yourself a traveler, the first lesson you should learn is humility, especially because you've been around, you've seen how poor some places are, how difficult life can be for some people. So you then becoming arrogant or superior, to me, is never okay. And it's true that some of the people who've done every country have done so far too quickly. They're ticking off a list. They don't spend enough time in the countries they go to. So that is not a very good way of traveling. I think especially at Nomad Mania, we are learning more and more the value of slow travel. And this is probably something that you as digital nomads could teach us more about, because that's when you really understand a place better. Now, let us look at some numbers and a bit of the history of traveling to every country. Who was the first person who did this, at least according to our data? Now, let me say here that the whole of the rest of the presentation is based on our research. It is extremely difficult to come up with reliable messages because we may not have data from 1960 or 1970. This is not available, and obviously many people travel to every country and we never know about it. So this is based on what we know. The first person is a Finnish journalist called Rauli Virtanen. Both Orest Zub, who spoke to you a few days ago, and myself have had the pleasure of meeting him. He covered the Vietnam War. In 1972, he traveled to then South Vietnam and covered the war from there. And more recently, he was in Ukraine covering the war there. And through a career spanning 50 years, he has done some incredible war and conflict journalism. And as an aside, he has managed to travel to every country. He was the first one to do all the countries as they were then. So back in 1988, we did not have 193 because Soviet Union was one country, Yugoslavia was one country, so there were far fewer, but we count that as having done it. Then after 1988, slowly it became more and more popular. Until the year 2000, we find 19 people overall who have visited every country, mostly from the United States. And the year 2000 is the last one for which we have a zero. No one we know of completed every country in the year 2000. After that, we've got increasingly more people doing it, 5, 6, 7 per year. Then it grows to 12, and then it becomes more and more of a thing, more and more of something to do. So in 2019, the year before the pandemic, we've got 47 people who've done every country. And last year is the record year. We've got not 51, but ever since I sent the slides, we discovered one more. So we've got 52 people who've done every country. Now, there's a new trend. Some people are visiting every country a second time. And so far, we know of 3 people who have actually achieved it, but there's 2 people in Spain who are getting there. One of them is only missing North Korea because it's not open yet. So this is a bit about the history, but let's look about the people. Who are they? Oh, well, this is actually a slide about the years. You can see how it's growing. And this year, here you've got 3 listed, but I'm happy to tell you that as of today, we've got 22 people who have done every country in 2024, meaning completed it. We, by the way, call these people United Nations Masters. This is our jargon in the community. Now, which countries are represented? What are the nationalities of these people? Well, there are 45 countries with a UN master. That includes dual citizens, so we will accept that as countries. Bulgaria, where we are now, does not have a UN master that we know of. If there is one and we find out, we will be delighted. However, neighbors, Romania and Greece, do have a UN master, as does Turkey to the east and Serbia to the west. There are a number of countries represented. Of course, the leader here in terms of how many people have visited is the United States. There are 126 American citizens that we know of who have visited every country. The runners-up are Germany and the United Kingdom with about 30 people. However, what may be interesting is that it is Finland that's actually the leader if we look at its population. So Finland has 18 UN masters in a population of only 5 million. So that means you've got one UN master per about 330,000 population. And that is, in fact, the leader. Now, unfortunately, just like life itself is incredibly unfair and unequal, so is this. In terms of visiting every country, you can imagine that we have a lot of inequality by continent. If we look at Africa, we only have 3 people with an African passport who have done it. And guess what? All 3 are dual citizens and have a strong passport of another country. Similarly, we have very few people from Central and Latin America who've done it. And perhaps surprisingly, even in Asia, we don't have that many people, although it's true that our data may not be complete. This inequality is seen even more if we look at ethnicity of the people who've done it. Here it is very, very blatant how unfair this is. So the blue color here represents white, Caucasian, and we have an 87% white UN masters. 12% based on our data are Asian, and they are either from the Far East, meaning Japan, Singapore, and China, or from the Indian subcontinent. There are a few. We only have 5 people that we know of who are Black, Caribbean, or African, and all 5 of them have a strong passport, which allows them significant freedom of movement. So there's no sugarcoating it. Obviously, what passport you have will play a role in terms of how far you can go. But having said that, in our community, we are aware of more and more people who are really trying to go there, despite the fact that they've got quote unquote bad passports, or what we call low passport index passports. We already know of one Indian who did it all exclusively with an Indian passport, and Indians do need quite a few visas. We currently have a great friend from Algeria who is close to reaching 110 countries, and he's got his mindset on doing as many as possible. Now, I'm saying he a lot, and this brings us to the subject of gender. What about the gender of the people who've done every country? Well, no surprises here. This is a male-dominated sport, and based on our data, we've got 86% male and only 14% male. So there's about 50 women who have done every country. But there is good news. Almost half of these women completed 193 last year in 2023. So the numbers for women are growing a lot, even though they are still much lower than you can expect. Now, why are there perhaps so few women? People have put forward a number of explanations. Maybe women are more risk averse and do not necessarily want to go to some of the more dangerous corners of the world. Maybe they're not really interested. They don't necessarily compete that much. Or another idea is that women have so many more responsibilities that they simply don't have the time to do it. But, you know, I'll let you think about this a bit more. So what is the final number? How many people have been to every country? Well, this is obviously very difficult to pinpoint, but let's have a look here. Based on our data, we know of 377 people who claim to have done it. These are the people that we've seen have a claim. Now, of these, about 300, a bit less than 300, are the ones who are still alive, and we trust their claim. We accept it. That means no going to North Korea like this, you know. One thing I must stress is that some of the names you may see, some of these famous names who've been on CNN, BBC, etc., we actually do not accept their claim. And Guinness is very happy to accept this as North Korea. So that means that they go with that. Now, if we look at all our number crunching, and we also calculate the people we don't know of, we've never heard of them, and they're definitely out there. Maybe there's a couple of you in this room. Then 330 is our conservative estimate. This is how many we believe is sort of definitely have done every country legitimately. And then if we go to the more liberal estimate, where we add more people we don't know about and perhaps relax the criteria a bit, then we've got around 470 people that we believe have done it. So it's still under 500. That means that fewer people have been to every country in the world than are present at the Bansko Nomad Fest. Now, if you want to have a further look about this, on Nomad Mania, we have under travelers, we have a dedicated section called UN Masters, and this is where you can find out all the data. This data is sorted either by country of origin or by year of when we know that they finished every country, or based on our criteria. We obviously put Nomad Mania members first, and then further down we have different criteria, including what I like to call the list of shame. And those are the people who claim it, but who we actually don't accept they've done it. So, you know, you've got all sorts of categories there. We've also obviously got a separate category for those who are no longer with us. So that's more or less it. And I hope I've inspired you a little bit about trying perhaps to go to every country. Many people, when I tell them I've done it, say, but it's impossible. Well, no, it's definitely not impossible, but I'd say what you definitely need to have is time, a lot of desire, and at least a little bit of money. This is a collage of some of the people who've done it. You'll see that they don't really have very much in common apart from their love of travel. So there's people of all ages, of all interests, from many different backgrounds, of different education, and different financial means. But somehow they were driven enough to do it. It's been an honor talking here. Thank you so much. Now, if anyone wants to talk more about this subject, at 8 o'clock this evening, we are going to be at the party of Flat Away, which is going to be a nice social event. We're going to have a small table there, and we can discuss both the idea of visiting every country, as well as anything else that goes with Nomad Mania and the people who like to travel. Or if you have any questions about any country specifically that interests you, you can talk to us there. And also, if anyone here is interested in becoming a content and marketing manager for Nomad Mania, you need good English and you need to be good at digital marketing. You can come and see us because we're looking for someone. Thank you very much.